Of course, in the bottom box, Barack Obama. And we are awaiting him, a big rally in Española, New Mexico. And that brings us to our next subject. Kansas Governor Kathleen Sebelius making headlines on the campaign trail for Barack Obama. While stumping in Iowa, Sebelius explained why she thinks the race for the White House is so close. She says it could be because of Obama's race. Well, this remark renewing Democratic fears of what has become known over the last 20-some-odd years as the Bradley effect. This is that some voters may not vote for Obama because of the color of his skin. Fox's Shannon Bream is following this story from Washington. She joins us live. I was living in California in the 80s when, to the great benefit of George Deukmejian, the Bradley effect phenomenon took place for perhaps the very first time. Explain what that is and why Dems are so worried about it.
Well, yeah, John, you certainly had a front row seat to this because it refers to Tom Bradley, who did run for the California governorship back in 1982. He was a black candidate, and the deal was he was polling really well, but lost the race. So there's this idea that people aren't comfortable telling pollsters that they aren't going to vote for a black candidate. So maybe when they do get polling calls or surveys, they actually say they are going to vote for that person, but when it gets time to go into the voting booth, they don't do it. So yeah, some folks like Governor Sebelius are kind of suggesting this may come into play, especially because things are so tight in the polling right now with McCain and Obama. As for the Obama camp, they say, we don't think it's a factor. We don't believe in the Bradley effect. We don't think it's going to happen this time around. But there is some evidence out there that it's still a lingering issue. In fact, some voters, Hillary Clinton voters in the primaries in West Virginia, 1 out of 4 of them admitted that race did factor into their decision. In Pennsylvania and Ohio, 2 really crucial states, obviously, it showed up there too, 1 in 10 voters. So even though they're polling really close at this point, this Bradley effect, if it still exists, could come into play. And some analysts are saying that Obama needs to have a 5 to 8 point buffer going into Election Day to assure that it doesn't cost him actually a chance at the White House. John?
Yeah, and I was stunned. I checked our polling data. 20% of all Americans who were polled 9 months ago by Fox News Channel said that 20% they could not vote for an African-American president now, perhaps never. Thanks very much, Shannon Bream, live in Washington, D.C. All right, over to Martha and her panel. Martha?
Thank you, Greg. Well, David Gergen also echoed Governor Sebelius' thoughts on race. He served as White House advisor, of course, to Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan and Clinton. He had this to say on the issue of race in this presidential election on Wednesday. He said race has and is the big gorilla in the room that you can't get around, and we have made a lot of progress, but we're not there yet. It gives a lot of unpredictability to what we do. I think he's mixing, I think it's the elephant in the room and the 800-pound gorilla. But anyway, we get the sense of what he was saying. Bernard Whitman is a former pollster to President Bill Clinton. Angela McGowan is a Fox News political analyst. And Chris Salisa is a political reporter and blogger with WashingtonPost.com. Chris, let me go to you first on this. It seems to me that whenever there's sort of any dip for Obama in the polls, and this is over the last week I'm referring to, you start to hear a little bit about this race issue coming from some of his surrogates and really never from the other side.
Well, look, I think that race, I know Senator Obama's campaign doesn't talk about it, and I think smartly so. I'm not sure it does him a lot of good to talk about it being a factor, but of course it's a factor. Tom Bradley, you mentioned, Doug Wilder, who ran for governor and won in 1989 in Virginia, Harvey Gantt, the mayor of Charlotte, who ran for the Senate in 1996 against Jesse Helms. All of these folks had higher poll ratings than they wound up with on Election Day. So the Obama campaign knows it's a factor. I think what they're trying to do is build a ground operation that ensures that they turn out every single person who is for him in hopes of lessening the Bradley effect. But to insist that it's not the case, I think, is a mistake.
That's an interesting point, Chris. So you're basically saying that by allowing some of the surrogates to talk about this, they're trying to inspire the base. They're trying to say, don't let this opportunity pass you by. Make sure you show up and vote.
Barack Obama has said, and not about race, but he has said the stakes are extremely high in this election. We need to make sure all our supporters get out. There's no question about that.
All right, Angela, what do you think about this and it being brought up by, you know, some very prominent folks?
We don't live in a colorblind society. We don't live in a gender-blind society. Having said that, Iowa, let's talk about Kansas, let's talk about Oregon. He won those states. I think the more you make race an issue, it will be an issue, and I think that the Obama team is very smart not to bring it up. I think it's very dumb for his surrogates to bring it up because at the end of the day, you keep pushing that to the forefront, people are going to think about that. But if you talk about the issues, Martha, and that's what people care about. I believe that the country is ready for a female president. I believe the country is ready for a black president.
But you know what? I'm just very interested in Chris's point, because when you talk about brass tacks and you talk about inspiring the base, right? You have conservatives, talking about attacks on Sarah Palin. You have, and that gets people fired up. So Bernard, does it accomplish a goal in some ways to bring this to people's attention and say, do not let the Bradley effect happen again? Show up, get out there and vote.
Well, here, look, I think that we fortunately have largely gotten over the Bradley effect from a polling perspective. People who, through ignorance or racism alone, are not going to cast their ballot for Barack Obama are likely telling pollsters that either they're voting for John McCain or they're undecided. The bigger issue here is turnout, particularly estimating turnout among young voters, new voters, occasional voters, and independents. And let me tell you this, Barack Obama is doing extremely well in all four of these groups. And I believe that ultimately it is going to come down to turnout. And compared to 2000 or 2004,
right,
when the Democratic operation was a little sluggish, we have an extraordinary ground game, thanks in large part to the system that Obama built. And I think that will ultimately be the decisive factor on election day.
He's enjoying a nice lead at the moment. He's got the strongest lead that we've seen for him in weeks, 48-44. And the suggestion that some of his supporters might become a little bit complacent is maybe something that they're concerned about and might be driving this. So let me just hop downstairs to the newsroom for 1 second, because we asked viewers what they thought about this, and Greg has some of their responses for us. Greg?
Interesting responses. Let's go to Ryan from Oregon. He says, quote, I think race is always a factor because every individual has their independent biases. There are still many people within our country today that have specific bias against color and sex. Racism is still very evident in America's current society. It will definitely be a factor for some, but not for all of us. Dan writes to us the following. I think that race has nothing to do with the election. This is not the 1800s. People that say this election is about race are the reason that racism is still around. Well, Judy in Oregon disagrees. She writes, absolutely race will play a role, just as gender will. We would be sticking our heads in the sand to think that all of America is no longer racist or against a woman in office. So we're getting lots and lots of emails, Martha. Really surprising, some of the responses we're getting. Back to you, Martha.
All right, go ahead. Quick thought, I cut you off.
I think it's a small percentage, though, because at the end of the day, you can get out the vote in the black community. If Obama gets 90% of the black vote, 40% of the white vote, Zell Miller has said it, he will win. I think the swing vote, the Catholic vote, and the women vote.
I was just going to say,
are going to decide
I don't want to leave Chris Liz out.
issues.
Chris, just like 15 seconds to respond to all that, and then we got to go, but I want to get back to you.
Just very, very quickly, I think there's a distinction between saying race is the only issue in this campaign and race will be a factor.
Well,
I think both of those things are true. Race is not the only issue, but of course, I believe it will play a role in some people's vote.
Just as it would for a woman or a black man or a Jewish person or a Catholic. There's a percentage of people out there, or a Mormon, exactly.
If you're so undecided, you're not going to choose on race.
This is a very tight race. Any way you slice it, this is a very, very tight race, and it says that people care a lot about both of these candidates and feel very strongly about them. Chris Liz in Washington, thank you very much. Great having you with us today.
Thanks,
Angela McGlowan and Bernard Whitman, great to have you with us, as always. Thank you guys. I'm going to send it back to you, Greg, in the newsroom.
All right, Martha, thanks.